Hello, I'm Sharon Megdal, Director of the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center. I'm pleased to be talking to you about my favorite topic, which is water. And I've entitled my talk for today, Bridging Through Water. And I'll come back to this title at the end. But on this cover slide, you'll see an old bridge over the lower Jordan River. You also see my contact information and the website for the Water Resources Research Center. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the Water Center. We're part of Arizona Cooperative Extension and the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Arizona. We work on projects that are connected to the practical world of water management and education. And again, please see our website address, which is the source of some great information, and also the website for subscribing to our weekly wave, which I'll say a little bit more about in just a moment. We work intensively and extensively on raising water awareness and improving water literacy. We do this through applied research projects, through various educational programs for all ages. Our programs are often tailored to regions and subregions. We have many student internship and project opportunities. The Water Resources Research Center houses Arizona Project WET, Water Education for Teachers. It is the Arizona section of a large national network headed by a faculty member, Carrie Schwartz, here at the Water Resources Research Center, and it's a dynamic program. We sponsor an annual conference. There's a photo of one down in the bottom corner of this slide, and the topic varies by year. We offer seminars, which we very often broadcast live or live stream them. And if given permission by the presenters, we will post the recordings afterwards for people to view. Regardless of where you are then, our seminars are available to you, and much more. And we do much of our work through partnerships, and engagement is very important to us. Two-way interactions, gaining input from people out there outside the university, and also hoping to lend our expertise to them. This photo is a photo from our 2015 annual conference, which was entitled Indigenous Perspectives on Sustainable Water Practices. And this was held on the Gila River Indian Casino, and pictured there is their governor, Governor Stephen Roe Lewis, presenting me. I'm there in the middle with the two program co-chairs, Carletta Chief on your left, and then Professor Jeannie McLean to my left on your right. We're all professors in the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. And it was a great seminar with about 350 people attending, and lots of perspective and information shared. And I mention this to you because I know that many of the teachers who are participating in the program to Jordan have connections to indigenous communities of one type or another. And we do have an issue of our newsletter back in 2015 fall that was devoted to reporting on the conference. So I do encourage you to consider subscribing to our weekly wave, even though you may not be in Arizona. As I said, we broadcast our seminars live. We provide interesting information, or we hope interesting information, such as this being an example that's pictured there. I was just giving some lectures in Singapore and learning about their water management, and just posted a reflections piece on that recent trip. So to the subject at hand, talking about water policy and water management. And this is a slide I use in the first meeting of a graduate course that I teach on water policy and management in Arizona and semi-arid regions. And I note, as you see here, that water policy and management reflect many factors. And I've listed several with underlining a few. Resource availability, that goes without saying, but it has to be on the list. The location of water demands and water supplies, economics and financial aspects. The historic and current legal institutional framework is very, very important because sometimes the laws don't necessarily jive or make sense uh, according to the physical properties of water cycles. For example, some legal frameworks do not recognize the connection between surface water and groundwater, but we know from the water cycle they are connected. Of course, the nature and involvement of multiple governmental and non-governmental entities, and this includes to what extent decision-making is centralized versus decentralized. If you travel to other countries, as many of you will be doing, you may find in a given country things are very centralized under a national system. In the United States, on the contrary, water management and policy are quite decentralized. Yes, the federal government may set drinking water standards and some discharge standards, but much authority rests with subnational governments or tribal governments. Politics and public values are connected, and socio-cultural factors, of course, will determine what you see in terms of water management. History is important. It sets the foundation or background for the current. Of course, what information is available, and much more. And you can see that I have noted here in red the importance of context, especially the hydrologic cycle, which I've already mentioned, and the geographic context. So this next slide shows a graphic depiction of the water cycle. Some of you may teach about this in classes you teach. You've learned about it. Your students have learned about it. And why I like to show it is for a few reasons. I'd like to remind everybody that no new water is created. It may change form. It may move from place to place. Its quality may change. But what we have here on the earth is what we have here on the earth. Another reason I like this particular graphic is it depicts an aquifer, an underground formation in which there are water particles interspersed with clay and sand and other types of particles. And that's groundwater being stored in an aquifer, not in a pristine blue lake, but actually interspersed in those porous materials with wells pumping out that water. So we have to keep that in mind as we think about water management. And then the geographic context is extremely important. So I live here in Tucson. I've got that circled in red, kind of in the south central part of Arizona. And Arizona, as you know, is in the southwestern United States. And we're part of the larger Colorado River Basin. And the Colorado River is very important to all 7 states that fall within its boundaries and the Republic of Mexico. And these darker shaded boundaries show the hydrologic boundaries of the watershed. And then there are areas outside it that are hatched here in reddish orange that are served Colorado River water but are outside the boundaries of the basin. And it's been estimated that overall, perhaps 40 million people, one way or another, depend upon the Colorado River water. And I see my arrows are a little bit, maybe a little bit off here, but Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam are 2 iconic structures that are very important to establishing the water reservoirs that are critical in the case of Glen Canyon to the upper basin states, and in the case of Hoover Dam to the lower basin. I'm not going to be spending time talking about Colorado River water management to any great extent here, but I wanted to show you this map because basically Arizona where I live, Tucson where I live, the areas in the basin are not independent of each other, and very often we're sharing water, and that includes many tribal nations. And then the other region of focus that I wanted to put a map up to just show the general geography is Jordan, and particularly its neighbors on the Palestinian territories, and Israel to the west. And we'll talk some about that. But you can see Jordan has many direct neighbors, and its only body of seawater adjacent to it is the Red Sea down here at the very southwestern tip of the country. And we'll come back some and talk more about some of the cooperation with its neighbors. But I do want to note, if you look at the map of Jordan, you see Amman, the capital, is to the north, and most of the cities are in the northern part. And that geography is important when we talk about water options available to the country. Much of it is very dry and not populated with cities and towns. Amman is the town closest to Petra, which is very famous and a beautiful place to visit. So I've been working in the Middle East area in one way or another since about 2006, and more intensively since the 2009-10 timeframe. But because of the similarities that I list here on this slide, I decided to undertake putting together a workshop. And it took a few years to get it all together. But in 2009, the University of Arizona in Tucson hosted a workshop on Arizona, Israeli, Palestinian water management and policy. And we did not include Jordan at that time. But the commonalities that led me and some colleagues to think that it was a good idea to try to bring together people who are working on policy and management issues, not only engineers, but not excluding engineers, that the similarities are listed here, those that struck me. Growing populations and economies, water scarcity, semi-arid to arid climate change impacts. It's quite interesting when you look at what is being experienced in each of the two regions, or particularly the southwestern part of the United States and Israel, Jordan, Palestine area. Warming temperatures, sometimes changing precipitation patterns. Large-scale agricultural activities that are very important to the growing economies of the region, and shared borders. So we put together a workshop, as I indicated, that was held in 2009. Since 2010, I've traveled to the Middle East region many, many times. And it was in early 2013, of course, we were putting the book together. Before that, that we published this book entitled Shared Borders, Shared Waters, Israeli, Palestinian, and Colorado River Basin Water Challenges. And we also, I and a few Israeli researchers published an article a few years ago that we called A Tale of Two Rivers, Pathways for Improving Water Management in the Jordan and Colorado River Basins. I show you pictures of both of these just to indicate that there truly are similarities. And with those similarities, there are learning and collaboration opportunities. And in fact, in 2011, I had the wonderful opportunity, my first opportunity, to visit Jordan. And I started a collaborative project with researchers at the Royal Scientific Society in Amman on gray water reuse for agricultural purposes in the Jordan Valley. And our first article was on household survey results in the region. And then we published a second article relating to water quality. And you can see me there. Um, the person to my left, this person here, Mr. Chuck Graff, is also from the United States, from Arizona, from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. The rest of those pictured are all Jordanians who have had worked on the project with us. And the two key researchers, principal investigator, Dr. Ayub Garar, and remember him because I'll show you a photo later, and Dr. Othman, pictured there to my right, your left. And I've maintained a close friendship with both of those individuals since that time. First visit 2011, second official meeting of the project in 2012 November, and I was in fact there also in March 2012. So this was a vibrant project that's led to long-lasting relationship, which I'll come back to. But now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the problems and challenges of the region you're going to, and put our discussion in the context of what's been called wicked water problems. And a few years ago, I think it was 2016, a water expert from California, Lisa Butler, gave a keynote speech at our annual conference. And she talked about wicked water problems, and we came back to her and said, you know, we got a lot of very good reaction to your talk. They found it very interesting. Could you please write a column for our newsletter about it? And so she did, and I pictured it there. It could be found on our website. I've just picked out some key points from that. And so I'd like to spend a minute or two discussing those. The first being that more and more water problems seemingly defy standard solutions. They're complex, multifaceted, and it's not that one thing will be the solution. And I'll give you one example. In the Colorado River Basin, in Arizona, in many places where there's growing demands relative to fixed or sometimes shrinking water supplies, we know that conservation is a solution. But it's often recognized that conservation is not a sufficient solution. It will not get you to a balance of supply and demand. So there are other things that we need to think about. So there's not just a single solution or a standard solution that's one size fits all. And the reasons she gave for that are shown here: incomplete or contradictory knowledge. And sometimes people don't have a common set of facts or understanding. Oftentimes there are many, many people and opinions involved, and people have different opinions or interpretations of the science and the facts, and there can be many, many different factions, different viewpoints, different individuals involved. Often solutions or sets of solutions could have large economic burden. And so how that burden is spread makes it sometimes difficult to implement a solution or part of a solution that can at least address part of the problem. And then very often the water problems or the wicked problems are connected with other problems. And I should note that this concept of wicked problems has a history of literature and philosophy that goes back before a connection directly to water. But what has happened quite a bit in the last few years is that this concept has been brought into water discussions. And so in this particular instance, we're talking about the interconnected nature of water problems and challenges with other issues, such as geopolitical issues. And so sometimes there may be a solution, it's agreed upon, it's might be some kind of treatment plant, but there could be geopolitical issues that impact the project going forward or the speed at which it may go forward. And Lisa Butler notes that managing wicked problems is a new kind of work. It requires changing the questions, managing uncertainty, and creating resilience. She also notes, and this is important for those of us who work across disciplines, that work on these issues requires multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams. It's not just the engineers that can solve the problems. It often may take a team of people to understand the true context in which these wicked water problems present to identify pathways to solutions. So let's just take a moment to talk about some of the wicked water problems of our Middle East region of focus. And there are more than those listed, and somebody may disagree with something I have on the list or think something else should be put on it in place, but this is here to be illustrative for purposes of discussion. The lower Jordan River, the flows are very low, and the lower Jordan River is the only inflow into the Dead Sea. And so my second item listed here is the Dead Sea condition. And this graphic to your right shows the shrinkage of the Dead Sea over time. And at one point, the Dead Sea basically had a northern part and a southern part with a narrower area in between. You can see the depiction from 1931. You can see what happened by 1984. There was a separation. And then by 1993, there's shrinkage much greater than that. And if this were updated to a more recent date, there would be even more shrinkage of the sea. And that has implications for infrastructure along the sea and safety of roads nearby. The bottom section, by the way, still has water in it, but it's water that's been diverted from the northern part, which I like to call the real Dead Sea, for purposes of potash mineral processing, both in Jordan and in Israel. And basically the border, part of the border between Jordan and Israel and the Palestinian West Bank is along the river there, or excuse me, along the Dead Sea, particularly between Israel and Jordan. Wastewater treatment is an issue, whether areas have it available or may use cesspools, and those cesspools may have the potential to contaminate or pollute the groundwater, and groundwater may be relied on for meeting certain water needs. And so the whole question of, are communities on grid or off grid for water, for wastewater, even in some places for electricity. Water availability in terms of the general scarcity of it, but also whether the infrastructure is available to deliver it on a regular basis. And this is something we experience in the United States as well. For example, it's estimated somewhere 30 to 35% of the Navajo Nation residents are off grid from a water system. And but you might be part of a water system, but there might not be the water supply or conditions available to deliver water on a 24/7 basis, which many of us in the United States are used to and pretty much take for granted. And so that's why you'll see When you travel around, in many areas there are storage tanks on the roofs of houses and apartments because they store the water when it's available for use when it's not available through the delivery system. And then there are water sellers, who sell water off of trucks and the like. And then the reliability is also connected to the things I've just said. And water quality, of course, determines the quantity of water that can be used. The photo on the bottom left, your bottom left, is a photo taken from the Jordan side of the Dead Sea, where there are some very nice hotels, but with the sea receding, there may at some time, or may have been already, some adjustment to the properties, but they're actually quite beautiful. So what are some of the key factors that contribute to identifying pathways to solutions to these wicked water challenges? And this photo here is from a workshop from this past April 2019, hosted by Hashemite University. And it was on sustainable development of arid lands, offered under the patronage of His Royal Highness Prince Al Hassan bin Talal, who's there with the tan jacket in the photo looking at me. I had the great honor to participate in both the opening session and provide an opening keynote speech at that April workshop. So what are some of those functioning or some of those factors that contribute to identifying pathways to solutions? Functioning cooperative mechanisms are very important, especially when you're working across borders. And this is something that we've had conversations about between our region, looking at US Mexico, and their region of the Middle East, with the example of some cooperative agency, the International Boundary and Water Commission between the US and Mexico, being a very functioning agency. Sometimes some of these cooperative mechanisms might exist on paper, but they don't meet regularly. There may be obstacles to people traveling from one country to the other, and and so while it might be there on paper, it's not always functioning. Trust and mutual respect, and you'll hear me mention trust and respect a few times in this presentation. They're both very, very important. It takes time to build trust. Trust can easily be shattered, and mutual respect is so very important. You have to respect the people with whom you're working. Involvement of stakeholders is also extremely important. Often you might have people who have these different opinions, as I noted earlier, about potential solutions, about even what the problem is or is not. You really do need to get everybody at the table to talk about it, because if you don't, you might develop a solution or solution set and go to implement it and then face some stiff opposition to that. Communication throughout and through everything is very important, both verbal, written, very important to be able to have a good communication methods. Sometimes it takes persistence. There can be obstacles, there can be setbacks, there can be at times issues that seem difficult to address, but persistence can lead to good outcomes. Patience goes with that. Again, things can take time, and it's important that you be patient and not rush to judgment, and not get too discouraged if things aren't moving along as fast as one might like. And leadership is very important. Sometimes it takes some bold leadership, people to say some things or do some things that might not be popular. It may not be that what they suggest is even implemented in the end, but it might get people talking about alternatives to what may have been proposed that was not liked. And we've experienced that in our region here with addressing some of the issues related to expected shortages on the Colorado River. So I practice what I preach in terms of sharing lessons learned and providing opportunities for exchange of information, of practices, of outcomes. And this is a photo from this past November 2019, where I brought together panelists from 3 countries. In this case, it was Mexico, United States, and Israel, to talk about the role of technology in addressing some of the issues of water scarcity. Now, technology is not the only answer, but it is part of the solution in many instances. And a particular example or focus at that session is one of the region that you will be visiting, and that is this Red Sea, Dead Sea project. And I showed you where the Red Sea is to the very bottom, at the very bottom tip of Jordan, and it's also at the bottom tip of Israel. And actually, there was a 3-way agreement signed in 2013 involving Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories to partner in an effort to enhance the water supplies or augment the water supplies of the region through a desalination plant on the Jordan side of the Red Sea in the Aqaba region. And that plant would produce desalinated seawater, part of which would be sold to Israel. And Israel would provide more water in the north out of the Sea of Galilee to the Amman and northern parts of Jordan. Israel is already, under its treaty with Jordan, providing water from the Sea of Galilee to Jordan, and this would increase that. And there would also be some water available to the Palestinian Authority for use in the West Bank. Interestingly, this effort was an outgrowth of a study done by the World Bank of desalination options in the Red Sea area. And the study showed the potential for a hugely large and expensive project. And this would be just the first part of it, as more of a pilot project, but still very large. And not only would it provide usable water, but some of the desalination provides a brine stream. It takes salt out of water. The output that's used is the desalinated water, but then there's a stream of brine, very salty water, that something must be done with. And for seawater desalination plants, it's usually pumped back out for dissolution in the sea from which the source water came. In this case, what's being proposed is that the brine be mixed with some additional Red Sea water and be piped up to the Dead Sea, and therefore address some of the diminishing water supply or water quantity of the Dead Sea. There are a lot of scientific questions about that. And again, here's that map I showed you earlier, where you can see the Red Sea here, and there's this small part of Israel that borders it, a little bit larger part of Jordan, a little bit larger shoreline there. And then the population is up here. Here is your Dead Sea, and then here is your Sea of Galilee, from which water is transported into the northern part of Jordan. So at that panel, one of the things I asked the panelists to think about was, what are the most important variables or factors that contribute to implementing technologies across borders? Now, I had my own set of answers, which I didn't have time to share, but I'm going to share them with you here, and then I'll go to a slide that shows what they talked about. But just before I was at this panel and conference in November, I was at a conference in Tucson here at the University of Arizona, dealing with Colorado River issues, and a broad spectrum of people were at that: academicians, water agency people, water utility people, tribal representatives, environmental, non-governmental organization representatives from the university, both faculty and students and staff as well. And I was giving some closing comments at that conference. And so I came up with this, the importance of these particular items listed here, using the word respect. So I come back to that theme you'll see of respect and trust being so important. And I could come up, and I would challenge you to come up with other words that you might think might go with any of these letters or otherwise, but research is very important. Education, engagement, science, process, extremely important. Process for obtaining analyses, sharing analyses, discussing options, all of that. Engineering, I've mentioned, of course, it is important to be able to actually implement some of the technological solutions. And for C, I had more than I could list on the slide, but communication, consultation, compromise. Some people think compromise is a bad thing. It's often something that is required to arrive at solutions or pathways to solutions for these wicked water problems. Cost, of course, is very important. And then for T, certainly last, but certainly not least, is trust. So these were some of the items that the panelists mentioned in response to the question, the takeaways from this panel on implementing technology in a binational setting. One of them was eat with your partners. Sit down, break bread, and not have everything always be formal and work. The good functioning relationships, very important. It's important to identify what's beneficial to both nations or parties, so to identify win-win opportunities, although it was noted that identifying such opportunities can be difficult, and that relationships have peaks and lows. Goes back to the earlier comment about patience and persistence, and not to get too, let's say, depressed or discouraged when things are not going well. Especially when working with neighbors with different cultures and languages, good communication, sincerity, and leadership will enable things to happen. And then they came back to noting that eating together helps foster the friendships that then can facilitate the work to forge formal agreements. And in fact, we did break bread and had some of our participants eat together a few times, which was very nice. So let me now touch on just some general concepts that are important to thinking about how to balance supply and demand, how to meet food needs, how to work with issues of water security in many different settings. And I mentioned earlier that agriculture is very important. It's important worldwide. We have a growing population. There's going to be a need to feed billions of people more than are here now on the earth. And so agricultural water use efficiency is important to figuring out how to grow more food with a given amount of water, not just because there's competition now, but there's just a need to produce more food going forward. And so that's something very important. As the climate changes, there's talk about, when trying to get more knowledge about drought tolerant crops, ability to use different types of irrigation methods and the like. And in some of these photos, I tried to identify where they're taken just to give you an idea of where they were taken. And usually, unless identified, these are photos that I took. There may be one or two that I didn't take that I haven't identified as such. Okay, I mentioned that I started working in 2011 with the Jordanian partners on this innovative gray water system in Jordan. This is in the Jordan Valley, in an area where the households are up on the hill, the farming is all done in the valley. They get water through from a system that's a mix of treated wastewater and some other waters. And the idea was that a small scale gray water system that took some of the gray water, not the bad brown or black water, not from toilets, but from showers and other things, and put it through a filtration system, and then put that water into their storage reservoir, which is pictured here in the middle, could augment their water supplies and at the same time reduce the inflow to these cesspools in the households. These people are off the a collective or centralized wastewater treatment system. And so this project involved putting a system in for a household. Here's the father of the household and the youngest son, and these are other family members with me. I visited that area, I think 3 times all told, but that household twice. And this is some of the filtration system, and a solar panel was put on their roof because water had to be pumped up for some ultraviolet treatment. So the idea of figuring out how to reuse water, there are many different ways to reuse water, and one can be to collect rainwater and reuse that. This was taking gray water from a household system. Sometimes water is reused after treatment in a large treatment facility. I'll show you a photo of that in a moment. And so making the most of the water supplies you have and matching the water quality with the use are very important. And here are some photos where side by side we have outfall of treated wastewater. This is in my county, Pima County, in the Tucson area. This is actually before some upgrades to 2 treatment plants in the region. This lower below on your left is the effluent dominated reach below the 2 treatment plants. And then this photo at the very bottom left is a photo of a wetlands that was has been providing kind of aerated and additional treatment before the water that's not discharged in the river goes into some infiltration basins to mix with groundwater and to be used in a reclaimed purple pipe system that waters golf courses, schoolyards, and the like, mostly for outdoor turf irrigation. And then this photo on the right is the outfall from a large treatment plant in Jordan, and it flows into river or stream and then is mixed with some other surface water for delivery to some of those farmers and others that are in the Jordan Valley. And it was interesting because I showed a slide very similar to this at that April program I was at in Jordan at the Hashemite University, and His Royal Highness Prince El Hassan bin Talal stopped and said, "Look at that quality coming out here of our plant. It's looking better in Arizona than here, and maybe that's something we should be looking at and talking about." I mentioned harvesting rainwater. That seems like a logical thing to do. Sometimes there are downstream surface water rights holders that wouldn't want you to harvest all the storm water, which is a different scale than, let's say, household or small area. This is a photo on top of a rainwater harvesting system that is in a park area, a school in central Jerusalem that's right near a park. And you can see the painting that the students did on these barrels that are collecting rainwater. And this the collected water is going into the plumbing for the toilets in the school. So it's not going in for drinking water, but it's going in for some of the water needs of the school. And then down here is a photo again of the Water Resources Research Center, where we have a rainwater barrel. We don't actually have a lot to irrigate on our properties, but we've had that installed, and there's some research in water quality testing of the rainwater that goes on, and it is used to irrigate the limited plants that are around our building. Conservation, I've mentioned, this is very important, and I put this photo in. This collection of photos shows fourth graders who participate in a water festival, who learn about how heavy water is, and also that you don't want it to spill and waste, through a relay race to see which team can deliver the most water into a large container. And then up above, Arizona Project WIT has numerous programs, one of which is students assessing the water efficiency and water leakages on their school properties, and then calculating and looking at the water that can be saved by putting in sometimes just simple aerators on faucets on a sink, as you see here. And Arizona Project WIT in our state works with school districts throughout the state. And as I mentioned, there's a Project WIT in, I believe, every state in the United States. And they have some international programs as well. But conservation is a very broad concept, but these photos gave me the opportunity to speak to the importance of youth and educating youth, and the youth themselves then educate their families, and it can lead to some lifelong changes in practices. And I didn't want to forget about the natural environment, wetlands and the natural environment. And again, I just put some photos in side by side. This is on your left, an area in the Hula Valley of Israel that has an interesting story. It was a wetlands, it was dried out, it became too dry. They reintroduced limited amounts of water, very, very shallow amounts, and it's become an important birdway, flyway for migrating Eurasian cranes, and it's an ecotourism location. It's really spectacular to be there when the cranes swoop in to sleep at night during their migration. And then on the right is the Sweetwater Wetlands. I had a photo of that earlier. In fact, I just was there the day before I'm delivering this seminar. I'm recording this seminar, and it's an area where you can see just what not that much water can do in terms of foliage, in terms of wildlife, in terms of bird watching, in terms of just being able to walk in an area that's quite different from the surrounding areas because it's got these wetlands there. Now I'm getting to my concluding points here of this talk, and I want to come back to the issues of cooperation, education, stakeholder engagement. And that is something that we work on a lot at my water center with communities around the state, very often rural communities. And this is a photo of a workshop that was held in our large conference room. Very often we go out to the communities and hold the programs there. And sometimes we need to get an idea of what are people's concerns and what words do they use and think about when asked certain questions. And so this is a word cloud that came out of one of the experiences where we asked people to give us feedback. And even, I should note, when we did our 2015 conference on Indigenous water perspectives, we actually had a steering committee for the agenda whom we polled to think about what words should we use in the title, because different words have different meanings and implications for different people. And so we've started doing that to consult people even when we title our conference. And I wanted to mention one particular university level education program that Professor Dr. Carletta Chief oversees, funded by the National Science Foundation, called Digifuse. And FUSE stands for Food, Energy, Water, Security, Sovereignty. And this is a very special program for educating graduate students, both master's and PhD, and they're the target of a lot of their field work is actually the Navajo Nation, where Dr. Chief is from. And the students, some might be of indigenous nations, some not. And in fact, as you can see, they have 12 trainees to start. 42% are Native American, 58% would be considered minorities, and it's a split between male and female, and also a split between PhD and master's students. And so just another level, because I haven't really focused on the university level at this talk, and I haven't really said anything about the undergraduate level, but experiential learning at all levels is extremely important. And it can help accomplish those things that are listed here, intercultural awareness, technology, help assist water food security, and develop a diverse workforce. So, getting now to the conclusions and going back to my title, Bridging Through Water, there are many challenges to mitigating wicked water problems, especially when these problems involve borders of sovereign entities. And in the United States, this includes borders with sovereign tribal nations. And I think it's important to emphasize that partnering in the development of information can be foundational to identifying and implementing solutions. And I'd like you to think about water as something we bridge through and not just over. And in fact, sometimes in that part of the world you'll be visiting, with all that goes on geopolitically, the water folks, the water managers, the water agency people, sometimes can have good dialogues and cooperate. It may be other things that may sometimes stall or interfere with implementation of solutions or cooperation. And so you're going to an area, those of you who are going to Jordan, where there are major challenges. Jordan is estimated to be anywhere between the second and fourth most water stressed country in the world. But by working together, by sharing knowledges across many different types of professions and ages and peoples, we can make progress. And what I have also on the slide is the cover slide from this slide up here on your upper right is the cover slide for a report that was released about 14 months ago for the Colorado River Basin, is 10 Tribes Partnership Tribal Water Study. And this was an outcome of an example where a study had been done of the basin, but it didn't really incorporate or consult with the tribe sufficiently. So the Bureau of Reclamation worked on a companion report with the tribes. And this map is very significant because it doesn't really show the state boundaries like I showed you earlier, but rather the tribal land boundaries. And in many cases, tribes, or in some cases, tribes span or cross multiple state boundaries. And they do have sovereignty. So this is an important activity that built collaboration, built trust, respect, upon which there are further developments, there are further efforts to for the tribes to have more of a voice and to be working together with others to build capacity and the like. So it's an example of where a study effort bore great fruits and will continue to bear fruits. Below, I've pictured the cover, it's front and back, of a study I've been involved with, an effort I've been involved with to study aquifers at the border between US and Mexico. And we produced one study, and another one's in the works, that are truly binational studies. They're in both English and Spanish in every way, including every map and every key to every map. And this itself is also an important activity. It doesn't get, and it isn't designed to get to the issue of binational management of the groundwater in the aquifers, but having universities, university personnel from both sides of the border work together, to have agency people from the US Geological Survey in the United States, from the Mexican National Water Agency CONAGUA, working through the International Boundary and Water Commission that I mentioned earlier. It's been a very significant activity as a study activity. And below is just a snapshot of a page about the signing of a water sharing agreement in 2013 that involved the three parties that I mentioned earlier that are involved in the Red Sea Dead Sea project. And as I mentioned, that was an outgrowth of a study. So there's a concept of, you don't want to have paralysis of analysis and think that you're going to study everything to perfection so you know everything, but sometimes the study activities are very important to providing baseline information for both those involved in the studies and elsewhere, and then some steps along the pathway to solutions can then follow. And I do want to mention that working across borders can forge lasting friendships. I mentioned Dr. Ayub Gurar earlier, and this photo was taken with his family in April when I was in Jordan and visiting there, and had the opportunity to visit his home and meet his whole family. And so I hope that those of you going to Jordan will perhaps have the opportunity to develop some lasting friendships. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and watching this seminar. And I think we all should be like the frog. And I wish you all great work and great opportunities. So thank you.